A batting average of 400 is seemingly impossible to reach in Major League Baseball. The idea of hitting 400 still floats around the league today. Luis Arraez was hitting 400 as late as June 24th last year, yet he fell well short of the mark by the end of the year with an average of 354. Steven Kwan was hitting near 400 just a few weeks ago, and now his batting average is all the way down at 340. It looks like they have a chance for a little, but eventually it always seems to come down. Hitting 400 in today's game is nearly impossible. The last time this feat was achieved was in 1941 by Ted Williams, who finished the season with an average of 406. Several players have made a run at 400 since 1941, but nobody has been able to eclipse it since. It has been over 80 years, and there have been some pretty close calls, but they have all fallen short. Some barrier is seemingly holding these players back, but what is it? Are we ever going to see someone hit 400 again? Well, to answer these questions, we first need to go back to 1941 when it was last done. By the way, only 97% of you are subscribed, so if you enjoy the video, think about subscribing. It's completely free and you can always unsubscribe at any time. 1941 was a long time ago. Major League Baseball was in a completely different place than it is now. Let's take a look at the batting averages of all the qualified hitters in ascending order. The first thing that you might notice is the one dot all the way up in the upper right-hand corner. You guessed it, that's Ted Williams, who had a batting average of 406. Ted was well above the rest of the league, as you can see. There was a huge gap between him and the second place finisher, Cecil Travis, who hit 359. This gap is over 3 times larger than the second biggest gap between two players. Ted Williams was an outlier. Just remember that for later. Now, this doesn't really help explain how the league is different from what it is today. To do that, let's add another set of data to this graph, the 2023 qualified hitters. When put in ascending order up against the 1941 season, not a single 2023 data point is greater than the 1941 data. In fact, there's a sizable gap between the two datasets that continues to grow as you go higher in batting average. The average batting average is clearly a lot lower in today's game. Batting average hasn't consistently declined since 1941, it has risen and fallen as the league has changed over the many years. It has, however, been on a significant decline since the turn of the century and is much lower now than it was in 1941. This, for the most part, explains the gap between these two datasets. I think a better way to visualize this data, though, is to look at the distribution for each season. Here we can see the 1941 peak is farther to the right than the 2023 peak. This means that the average player in 1941 had a higher batting average than the average player in 2023. But this also reveals that the hitters in 1941 had a lot more variation. The 2023 graph has a much steeper spike in the middle, meaning that the data was more strongly centered towards the mean. You can also see that the 1941 data is much more spread out. The spike is not as steep, and there's a much more shallow decline as the batting average increases to the right. The average batting average is not the only thing that's decreased. The standard deviation has also gone down quite a bit. Standard deviation measures how spread out the data is, and as you can see in this graph, batting averages have been getting closer and closer together essentially since the dawn of the sport. Remember how I said Ted Williams was an outlier? Well, now there are a lot less outliers in batting averages as the variance is getting smaller and the data is getting closer together. But why? Well, this happens for a couple reasons. First of all, hitters and pitchers are becoming more refined. The talent level has never been higher in the sport, which means that fewer players will stand out amongst the rest. Shohei Ohtani is a lot closer to the average hitter right now than Ted Williams was to the average hitter in the league in 1941. The same thing goes for pitchers. The most talented pitcher in the league is a lot closer to the average pitcher in the league right now than the most talented pitcher in 1941 was to the average pitcher at that time. There's just much less of a talent gap. Another reason is that there are no more secrets to the game. In the past few decades, training methods and developmental techniques have been optimized with the help of new technology and the use of data. There isn't much left out there that's not already known about hitting a baseball. Ted Williams used a much different approach in 1941 than other hitters at the time. Williams was an obsessive student of hitting. He famously used a lighter bat than most sluggers because it generated a faster swing. In 1970, he wrote a book on the subject, The Science of Hitting, which is still read by many baseball players. The book describes his theory of swinging only at pitches that came into ideal areas of his strike zone, a strategy Williams credited with his success as a hitter. This was knowledge that other hitters did not have, unlike nowadays where this kind of stuff is almost common knowledge. Okay, so this explains the more clustered batting averages and the lack of high outliers, but why has batting average as a whole just declined? That can be explained by the approach that hitters take in the modern game. Batting average does not hold the same weight that it used to when it comes to the stat world. Especially over the past decade, we've seen batting average begin to be phased out when it comes to discussing players' performance. This is because it turns out that batting average isn't really that great of a stat to evaluate players. For one, batting average weighs all hits equally. That means a home run counts the same as a double, and a triple counts the same as a single. A player who goes 30 for 100 with 30 doubles will have the same batting average as a player who goes 30 for 100 with 30 singles. Obviously, the player who hit the 30 doubles was much better and provided more value to the team, but batting average just can't show that. It also doesn't take into account how often a player walks. If a player walks 15% of the time and hits 270, most likely that same player is going to be better than a player who hits 300 and walks just 5% of the time. Nowadays, we have stats like WOBA and WRC+ that weigh all outcomes of an at-bat appropriately based on how valuable they are to a team. WOBA, or weighted on base average, is a stat that's very close to batting average, but it takes into account walks and has weights for each outcome of a plate appearance. Walks and hit by pitches are the least valuable, followed by singles, doubles, triples, and then finally home runs. WRC+ is found by taking a player's WOBA and factoring in the ballpark factors from where the player was playing in and normalizing it so that 100 is league average. These stats are a lot more descriptive than batting average alone, and they do a much better job at evaluating hitters since they eliminate the flaws of batting average. For this reason, front offices tend to look at those stats when evaluating a player's performance. They don't really care about their batting average. This means that front offices are going to look for players with a high WRC+ rather than a high batting average. Players who want to earn big contracts and look good in the eyes of front offices are going to mirror that same interest since they obviously want to make as much money as they can. Players with a high batting average are just not in demand. In 1941, however, it was a completely different story. Batting average was the stat to use to evaluate a hitter. Most of the time, the higher batting average you had, the better people thought you were, and you would ultimately be in higher demand and earn larger contracts. Players back then, as a result, focused on putting the ball in play and getting base hits. The approach that modern hitters take differs completely. If we go back to the WOBA calculation, the most valuable outcome of an at-bat is a home run. As a result, players are going to want to hit more home runs. This approach is going to lead to a lot more strikeouts. Nobody is going to be concerned about the increase in strikeouts though, because if you can walk a lot or hit for power, that can make up for a lot of strikeouts. Aaron Judge strikes out more than 24% of the time in 2024, but he's arguably the most talented hitter in the game. Because of this, strikeouts aren't really looked at as a huge negative, and there's not going to be much of a pushback to the frequency of strikeouts increasing. The increased frequency of the strikeout, though, is one of the main reasons why hitting 400 is impossible in today's game. Strikeouts have been consistently rising ever since 1925. In 1941, there were roughly 3 strikeouts per team in an average game in Major League Baseball. In 2024, there are over 8 strikeouts per team in an average game. There are 3 main outcomes that can happen with each plate appearance: a walk, a strikeout, or a ball put in play. With batting average, walks don't affect it at all, so we can just focus on the other 2. A strikeout can never be a hit. All strikeouts end with a batting average of 0. Balls that are put in play have 2 different outcomes when it comes to batting average: a hit or not a hit. As players strike out more and more, the number of balls put in play are going to decrease as a result, since there are a limited number of plate appearances per season. When there are less balls put in play, there are less opportunities for hits to fall, therefore batting averages are going to decline as strikeouts increase. Now, with StatCast data, we can look at balls that are put in play and predict the probability of them falling in for base hits. This is called expected batting average, or XBA. Expected batting average takes into account the launch angle and exit velocity of a batted ball and compares that to past batted balls with that same data and gives a probability that the ball will fall for a hit. For example, this batted ball has a high XBA because it is a hard hit line drive, and those often end up as base hits. This batted ball, on the other hand, has a very low expected batting average because it's a pop-up on the infield, and those are almost never a hit. This data can ultimately give us an idea of what the batting average of a player should be if everything had gone the way it was expected to. Meaning, if a player's actual batting average was greater than their expected average, then things probably went their way or they got lucky. Same thing goes for the opposite. If a player's actual batting average is lower than the expected average, then things probably didn't go their way and they got unlucky. So, to get an idea of how hard hitting 400 is, Let's look at the highest expected batting averages in the StatCast era, which is since 2015. Leading the pack by a large margin is Ronald Acuna Jr.'s 2023 MVP season, where he had an expected batting average of .357. This is a result of a crazy low strikeout percentage and his elite contact that he made when he did hit the ball. Following him is DJ LeMahieu's 2016 season, Miguel Cabrera's 2016 season, Luis Arraez's 2023 season, and Yordan Alvarez in 2022. In order for Ronald Acuna Jr.'s historic 2023 season to have been a .400 hitting season, he would have had to outperform his expected batting average by 43 points. This has only happened 26 times out of the 1,246 qualified seasons since 2015, which is just 2% of all qualified seasons. For second place DJ LeMahieu to do it, he would have had to have outperformed his expected batting average by 63 points, which has only happened once. 0.08% of all qualified seasons. For third place Miguel Cabrera to do it, he needed to outperform his expected batting average by 68 points, which has happened 0 times since 2015. Let's look at the 5 luckiest seasons in that same time span. The first place spot is held by D. Gordon, whose batting average was 66 points higher than his expected average in 2015. Following him is Nicky Lopez with a difference of .061, then Paul Goldschmidt, Marwin Gonzalez, and Jose Altuve. Even if you combine some of the best hitting seasons according to expected batting average and some of the luckiest seasons ever recorded, the probability of having a batting average of .400 is almost zero. That's enough modern statistical talk. Let's go back to 1994, a season where everything went right, yet still, .400 was proven to be impossible. Tony Gwynn, one of the game's greatest contact hitters to ever play, was going into his 14th year in the league as a 34-year-old, and he would have one of his best offensive seasons in his career. Everything went right for him to hit .400. He had a strikeout rate of 4%, which is extremely low. For context, there were only 2 players under 10% in 2024, Luis Arraez and Steven Kwan. Also, he had a BABIP, batting average on balls in play, of .389, which was the highest of his career. The balls he was putting in play were getting down at a very high rate. Things were probably going his way. The season was also shortened because of a player's strike due to a disagreement in the business side of the game. The season ended on August 12th, meaning that to qualify for a batting title, the sample size of plate appearances didn't have to be as large. As we know, weird things can happen the smaller the sample size gets, so this bodes well for a player hitting .400. Even with all of this happening though, Tony Gwynn fell 3 hits short of .400, ultimately finishing the season with a .394 batting average, the highest ever recorded since Ted Williams in 1941. 10 years later, another contact hitting legend made a run at it, and that was Ichiro Suzuki in 2004. He had a strikeout rate of 8.3% and a BABIP of .399, almost .400. He was putting the ball in play and probably getting a few lucky hits here and there. Another legendary contact hitter with one of the best contact hitting seasons ever recorded, and he finished with a .372 batting average. Not even close to .400. These kinds of seasons are getting rarer and rarer with the new approaches and the steady increase in strikeout rate across Major League Baseball, and it just might mean that we will never see another .400 season again. Is hitting .400 impossible? No, but the evidence suggests that it's highly unlikely. The game has evolved in ways that make achieving such milestones almost impossible. From increased strikeout rates to changes in player approaches and the overall rise in talent, everything is working against the modern hitter in their quest to reach .400. However, baseball has always been a sport full of surprises and remarkable achievements. While the odds are stacked against it, the dream of a .400 season will continue to captivate fans and players alike. Each generation produces its own unique talents, and who knows, maybe one day we'll witness another extraordinary player who defies the trends and achieves the seemingly unachievable. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you enjoyed it, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.